Okay, we are live. So, welcome to the HTUP podcast number 2. Lou and I did the first one just a few days ago, and today we have our first guest on the podcast. We got our friend Nate Macanian here, and we'll do a little bit of an intro shortly. But first, I want to offer it up to Nate to give us a little meditation to help us drop into the space together.
Sure. All right, let's do it. Well, I'll invite you wherever you are in this world to let your eyes slowly close, lean back, open up your chest a little bit, and take in that first spacious breath in and out through the nose. Let your body find a sense of rest wherever you are. Loosen up those shoulders. Let your facial muscles drop. And soften into the bottom of your breath here. Let it all settle. Connect with the intention that brings you to listening to this podcast at this point in time in your life. Where is that curiosity coming from? And return back to the space you're sitting in with a final deep breath. And when you're ready, I suppose you could open your eyes.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, that was a bit of high pressure. Like, hey, welcome to the podcast. You're doing a meditation.
Yeah.
It's a good way to break
I don't know
the
if you
ice.
could tell when I was leading that, but I was internally screaming at max volume.
Right. I do a lot of meditations online for Nectar, and I do feel like it's hard sometimes to come into the meditation when you're, kind of performing it for people on Zoom. But I feel like you get used to it the more you do it.
Yeah. And for me to lead a meditation, it's just an opportunity for me to like transition into that present moment meditative space and essentially just like notice what's happening in my awareness. And if something feels valuable, I'll just share that out loud.
Right. I feel like with that meta awareness of guiding the meditation, it kind of helps you notice your own awareness and how it's, what's happening in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And our minds all work pretty much the same way. So it's been pretty common where I'll be noticing a thought in my head when I'm guiding meditation. I'll be like, and if there are thoughts, just, notice them and come back to the breath. And after the meditation, the person will be like, dude, I don't know how you knew exactly when the thought came in my head. And I was just like, yeah, man, one mind.
We all have those things, those thoughts.
I actually have I heard a great thing recently about this. I hosted a ceremony, and part of what we did was sort of like a Quaker style sharing practice where we were all meditating silently. And if we felt some kind of inspirational message or quote or idea come through, then you could like speak it into the space. And this woman who was at the retreat, she goes, "The mind is for thinking." And at first I was like, well, yeah, for sure. But then I was like, oh shit, that goes deep. That's actually potent wisdom right there. Mind is for thinking.
Right. Yeah.
Nice.
So
Go ahead, Lou.
Please, Jack.
Oh, I was just going to see, Nate, before we get too excited and dive really deep, do you want to give just a bit of an introduction about yourself, what you do for work and for play, and how you got here?
For sure. Okay, there's always so many directions to take this story. I grew up in Long Island. I'm a first-generation American. My parents come from Iran, and I'll revisit why that's important later. But yeah, I've always had a fascination with psychology, neuroscience. So I went to the University of Michigan and studied, cognitive neuroscience, that sort of thing. And it was while I was at Michigan that I was exposed to mindfulness meditation, and I ended up trying it out and got really deep into it. I just thought it was a lovely way to, spend a few minutes a day getting focused in a way that leaves an impression on the whole rest of your day after that, So I finished my degree and I started teaching meditation with kids at community centers. This was back in 2016. And the meditation apps were really blowing up at that point. So I moved to San Francisco and I started working in the mobile mindfulness space. I was creating content and working for companies like Calm and Simple Habit. And then in 2019, after I'd been doing that for a while, I thought that I want to sort of take my psychedelic ventures to the next level and study with a teacher of some kind. So I spent a little bit of time in Hawaii living with a shaman there who really introduced me to a more ceremonial perspective on taking psychedelics and plant medicines. I had a pretty amazing time there. Like I was, picking ayahuasca and making the tea and helping this shaman host retreats. And learning qigong and all these energy practices amongst the waterfalls and the islands magic. So I had a good introduction to this whole, ceremonial psychedelic life. And from there, I started working different retreats and getting invited to host ceremonies in different ways and spaces. That complemented my Eastern mysticism interests very well. I mean, anyone who's taken a psychedelic in that more intentional way knows that there's a very Buddhist flavor to it. Very the sort of Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist teachings all start to make a little bit more sense. So I fell into that pretty deep as well. And then meditation and psychedelics for me were always just a beautiful synergy. And at this point now, I am facilitating all kinds of mindfulness and psychedelic based ceremonies and experiences. I teach meditation classes, and here in Oregon, where I'm living right now, I host both one-on-one and group, retreats and things of that nature. So that's what brings me here today. Oh, I forgot to go back to why my parents being Iranian is important. I'll revisit that later. I'll find a way to plug that in.
Cool. Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about the Iran piece.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you've ever read the Tao Te Ching on LSD.
I read the Tao Te Ching, and I don't think I've ever read it on LSD. I think I've read the Tao of Pooh on LSD, which is a little different. Also a great book.
Okay. Right.
But I'm going to make a note of that. That seems worth trying.
It is worth trying. I had an incredible experience reading it on acid when I was about 17, just like opening up completely to Taoism on acid by a lake with the book. I kind of now use it as like a trip guide or trip sitter when I'm taking psychedelics by myself, because it really helps you come back to the Tao.
Yes. That reminds me of a time where I was on some mushrooms and walking through the forest in Santa Fe. I was living at a Zen monastery at that time, And I had this Thich Nhat Hanh book with me, and I was just walking through the forest reading Thich Nhat Hanh, and it was a gorgeous experience. And then a bunch of birds just flocked right in front of me, like sat in front of me on this tree. And I took it as an opportunity to give them a reading of Thich Nhat Hanh. So I was that guy sitting in the forest on mushrooms, reading a Buddhist text to a bunch of birds, and it was awesome.
Hang on, Nate. I want to hear what the Tao of Pooh is.
Okay. The Tao Pooh is a brilliant book. It's very short. It was written in like the late 90s, I think, by this guy named Benjamin Hoff. And it essentially uses Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, as this iconic figure of Taoist wisdom. And all the different characters of Winnie the Pooh represent different aspects of Eastern mysticism. And so, I actually never grew up reading Winnie the Pooh, but I still connected so much with this book because it's funny and it makes a lot of sense, and it uses like relevant examples. And, it talks about like Owl and Christopher Robin and the rabbit all playing different roles in just like, the flow of life that Taoists often refer to. So it's been my most gifted book that I've given to people. And so far, it seems like other people tend to dig it too. Yeah, it's a good one.
Nice. Okay. That was not the Pooh that I was expecting, but I'm actually glad that I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Let it flow. All the Poohs.
Let it flow. Cool.
I have a question, and I just thought about this because, it's not often I meet someone that is also into Zen and Hinduism and psychedelics. I've contemplated this for a while, and I'm not sure about the answer. I don't know if there is an answer, but what do you think is the relationship between psychedelics, and specifically LSD, acid more so than mushrooms or DMT in my experience, and Zen Buddhism or Hinduism? Because in my life, I was introduced to Buddhism and psychedelics at the same time, just by serendipity. My mom bought me a book about Buddhism, and I started taking acid. But so to me, I always thought, oh, maybe it's just because of that, right? Because I started reading a book about Buddhism at the same time I started taking acid. So I'm curious about your own journey into Buddhism and Hinduism through psychedelics, or maybe it was the other way around.
Yeah. There's actually a book on this exact topic called Zigzag Zen. Zigzag Zen. It's all about how, psychedelics and Buddhism have this overlap. And in fact, many of the most popular American Buddhist teachers, like Jack Kornfield and those folks, they'll say how their entryway into Buddhist living was very much the psychedelic scene of the 60s and 70s. And there's so much connection here. I mean, for me, Zen Buddhism is really about letting go of the extremities of life that are not essential to what is present in the moment. And another way to say that is simplifying your life, just becoming deeply connected to the very fundamental elements of nature, of breath, of community. And if you've taken, a good dose of LSD in a nice natural setting, it has a very Zen quality to it, right? It's like you come out with this big breath and you're like, what am I spending all my fucking time on Instagram for? Like, this is what it's all about, And I have a memory of an LSD trip I took in the middle of the Michigan woods, and it was the winter, and I was laying down with some buddies, and the silence of the winter snow was so loud, if that makes sense. It was just pure silence. And all I felt was just this peaceful falling of these little snowflakes on my face. And I'm like, this is ultimately what we get so busy in our life for anyways, is to just come back to these basic values of feeling present, feeling connected, having people around you who uplift your spirit. And so, you know, Zen training is very complex, but it's also extremely simple. They use many different stories and teachings to all point to the same truth, which is that um, outside or aside from the creative fictional stories that the human mind comes up with about what keeps us busy and how we're separate from each other, and why it's important to be stressed in today's world, there's an invitation beyond it to just find that centered place within yourself and let that be where you come from, right? All you need is breath. All you need is the trees around you and the good vibes.
Sweet. Thank you. I couldn't agree more with your last, well, with all of that, but especially the last part. If anything, I learned from psychedelics and meditation. It's, well, not learned, but cultivated. It's that center within me from which I act and perceive. Yeah. And it reminds me, there's a quote, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard a Zen master say that taking LSD was spiritual masturbation.
Yeah. That seems
Right?
true. That
Yeah.
seems true. And
Right.
also, yeah, I mean, I've witnessed so many times, like in these ceremonies I host, of people coming out on the other side of like a good mushroom trip, feeling that they have connected to something that was not just some stimulating psychedelic phenomenon, but like really essential truth within themselves. And I had a
Mm-hmm.
client just last week who his intention going in was to understand interconnectedness, and his entire 5-hour trip was nothing but just like giggles and laughter and light and playfulness. It was extremely playful, and he didn't come across as a playful guy before.
Mm-hmm.
And his interpretation, which I shared, was like, the question to the mushrooms was, how can I find interconnectedness, and what is the point of it? And the mushrooms were like, to laugh and enjoy the creation that
Right.
you belong to. So in our integration call, he said, when I was coming up with an intention, at first I thought the mushrooms were supposed to serve me somehow. And now on this side of the experience, I realize that I am supposed to serve others. That is the pathway to freedom. And that has Hinduism and Buddhism written all over it right there, Neem
Mm-hmm.
Karoli Baba, the famous guru of Ramdas, he was asked all the time, how do you find enlightenment? And he just said, love people, serve people, feed people, and remember God. That's all you need.
Mm-hmm. Teachings to live by.
I want to pull on a thread that you named earlier and kind of tie it in with what we're talking about now. You said that you started, or at least earlier in your career, you spent time leading kids in meditation. And what was coming up as you were sharing about this client is like this idea of play. And with kids, I feel like, well, obviously kids are always excited about play. It's like a part of their personality. And that kind of gets pruned away as we grow older, unless we're intentional about it. Like the industrial society teaches us that play is not an acceptable or normal thing to do. And I guess I'm curious, like, first, what was it like working with kids in meditation and like their brains being in that very neuroplastic, very like, I think, alpha brainwave state where it is kind of psychedelic and they're just taking all kinds of stuff in. Like, I know that was a pretty big question, but I'm curious what that brings up, or what you remember from that time.
Yeah. Kids are such masters when it comes to this stuff. I mean, they were teaching me as much as I was teaching them. The context I first started working with kids in was in Colorado, doing outdoor education and guiding them on little wilderness expeditions. And so we would sit in the middle of the forest or some mountain, and I'd say, all right, guys, like, take off one of your layers, wrap it around your eyes, give yourself a blindfold, and see how many different sounds you could hear in the environment. How many times can you count your breath before you start having all these wild thoughts? And they were so naturally attuned to it, you know, because they're already so present. They don't live with any of the stories that we were talking about earlier. So yeah, there was that early experience. And then last year when I was living in Baltimore, I got a little internship at a school, elementary school, also teaching mental health classes, mindfulness stuff. And I introduced a little bit more compassion-based practices with these kids. And I would bring in like a Tibetan singing bowl one day, and I would pass it around for each kid to hit. And I would say, all right, so think of some kind of wish or happy thought that you want to share with all of the kids in this classroom. And when you have that, like, feel it and hit the bell and let the bell ring out that feeling to everyone in the room. And dude, the kind of shit that those kids were coming up with was so precious, man. You know, these kids, they'd focus, they'd get really like scrunched eyes, they'd get ready, all excited, they'd hit the bowl, and then it'd be like, I want you all to feel love. You know, it's just so innocent. So yeah, you know, I think it's a natural practice for kids, but the different flavors of mindfulness relating to patience and self-compassion and how to treat others kindly, you know, those can be intentionally cultivated with these kinds of exercises too. And the research is really inspiring. You know, I'm not going to remember the details of the study, but they found the school to do all these different kinds of meditations with different classrooms, and then they measured the outcomes of those different kinds of meditation. And the classroom that did like the loving kindness, compassion based meditations, they found those kids tended to have the overall best results. And it's, you know, the metrics were cute too. It's like they were most willing to share parts of their lunch or give out stickers to their friends or say kind things to, you know, people in the hallways, stuff like that. And yeah, the Dalai Lama, I think he said, if we got every kid to meditate by 8 years old, like the world would be a completely different place. And they're really ready for it. They're so ready for it. So if you're listening to this and you have children, no matter how wild and chaotic or immature or not ready for this they might seem, there's always a way in, and usually it comes in the form of games and play, right? You could turn mindfulness into a play exercise or vice versa. So always encourage, the kids to get into that, because I've seen what it could do, and it's beautiful.
That is beautiful. It makes me think about how, like, my happiest moments are when I embody that child feeling of just being like carefree in the flow and like joking with strangers too, like as if I am a kid who just met them. Like yesterday or a couple days ago, I was filming a video, like a Instagram reel, and I was out in nature, and there was just these people there, and they were doing their own thing quietly, like sitting by the river, and I was like filming, I don't know, 20-30 feet away. And as they got up and left, I was like, oh hey, do you guys want to be in my video? And just like this really playful invitation. And after that I was like, that's the kind of energy that just feels really wholesome, that I want to continue to embody.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, it's not, I feel like it's not, you know, kids don't have the ego that, there's not more ego than there needs to be. That just makes me think of I feel like as a child I was so happy and I didn't really think about myself. And then in my teenage years, I started, you know, having this self-consciousness or like ego consciousness that dominated my everyday life. And that's when you fall into unhealthy patterns. Whereas children, you just have a state of, well, you don't think about yourself as a separate self. You're kind of just in the moment experiencing what there is to experience. And that I think is very much related to the state of consciousness LSD brings you into, well, psychedelics bring you into, as well as meditation. It's, finding yourself by forgetting yourself, or finding yourself, capital S, by forgetting your self, small s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the most useful integration exercises that I give people is to identify something you used to love doing when you were a kid or when you were younger that you no longer make time to do. And I've had clients who middle-aged dudes who spend the night like painting or making shapes in the clouds, and they'll come back and share like, man, I felt the connection to that sense of open expansiveness that I think like something like depression is the total opposite of. It's sort of a more limited perspective on all that is possible. And play is medicine. Play is such medicine. And this guy who was laughing for the whole trip, I saw his face after. He looked like he was 5 years younger. There's no prescription drug a doctor can give you that'll do that.
I was just saying, it's like a constriction versus expansion of consciousness. When we constrict so much, we limit the possibilities, the imagination, versus the expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this reminds me of an analogy I share when I'm talking about basically the effects of psychedelics on your brain, especially LSD and psilocybin. If you think of this is a common analogy, and you may have heard it before, but if you think of like the top of a ski slope, where all the trails people use have this sort of like marked trail, that's where people have gone down, and when you see the trail, you're more likely to go down that trail. And the more a trail gets used, the more people are going to use it, because that's clearly the trail that you take. And our brain works in much the same way. The neurons that create those connections, the more those fire together, the more they're going to fire together. And in a way, this is how adult brains develop, right? We start to develop more rigid ways of thinking and opinions and beliefs and perspectives. Our personality tends to become a little more cemented, and there's benefit to this. But someone who's stuck in the same cycle of ruminating thoughts, where they can't get off that trail and pave a new trail, that's where this can start to be really detrimental. And if you look at the brain of people who have different kinds of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, their brains actually map this same sort of format of the neurons not connecting in the same way, and only certain limited pathways being used. And if you look at an image of the brain on psychedelics, like in an fMRI, you could Google this, like brain on mushrooms. This image is beautiful. You are seeing all this interconnected, just like artistic beauty happening. And the analogy of the ski slope, where mushrooms and LSD fit in, it's like a blizzard coming in, and it covers the trails with some fresh powder. And so you now have agency to choose which trail you wish to take. And there's a lot of benefit in being able to create new habits, think in new ways, react to situations in ways that feel more aligned, more integral. So that's a little image that I draw on a lot. And when people ask me about microdosing, what I think about microdosing, I'll share this same analogy and say that instead of a big blizzard, microdosing is like little snowfall coming down, giving you those slight amplifications of the creative energy and original thinking.
Very well put.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nate. And I just pulled
And
this
thanks,
graphic
Jack, for
up.
sharing.
Yeah, I haven't tried this feature before, but I think we'll be able to just include this in the video. This is the kind of graphic you're talking about, right, Nate, with the blizzard, the
Yeah,
snowstorm?
this is one of them. That's definitely a blizzard. And then there's another separate picture of
There's
psilocybin on the brain. Yes, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
right. There's also a favorite of mine, Jack. I'll send you a 3D. It's the 3D model with the
Mm.
faces. It looks beautiful,
Yeah,
but we can
send it.
share that later.
Sure. I'll overlay that later.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Um, do we mind if I bring this back to like psychedelics and meditation? This is like a very much a passion of mine, so I'd love to explore that a little bit more with you, if
100%.
that's all
Yeah,
right.
man, let's do it.
Cool. Um, do you know Wilson Van Dusen? He wrote LSD and the Enlightenment of Zen.
No, first I'm hearing.
So he wrote this phrase, which I think is just fascinating. He says there is a central human experience which alters all other experiences. It has been called Satori in Japanese Zen, moksha in Hinduism, religious enlightenment, or cosmic consciousness in the West. The experience is so central that people have spent their lives in search of it. Once found, life is altered because the very root of human identity has been deepened. I wish to draw attention to the fact that LSD appears to facilitate the discovery of this apparently ancient and universal experience. And I'm curious about your thoughts on the relationship between psychedelics and the experience of spiritual enlightenment, as well as how spiritual enlightenment had through psychedelics differs from enlightenment that you would find, in a Zen monk who's practiced meditation for 20 years.
Whew, yeah. I don't know the full answer to that, but I can give you only stories I've had from my own perspective.
Right.
Yeah, I think like the kind of feedback that I shared earlier from my client that, for him, freedom moving forward is to serve others. It speaks to some flavor of enlightenment, which is really pointing towards selflessness and how you are occupying this unique expression of a human being, which is you and your name and whatever you call yourself. And at the same time, you also belong very intimately to the web of life that is all around you. And this is a cliche that's spoken about all the time. But where it gets real is when it goes from being like a thought experiment and something that we could all scientifically agree is true, that, we're all made of stardust, to like a felt experience where you are actually in your bones feeling the truth of our interconnected nature. So when I think of enlightenment, I think of that. I think of that sort of interconnectedness. It's a loaded term that doesn't need to be, because in some ways it's very simple. It's like if you're just looking out the window and appreciating the color of the grass in your lawn, I mean, that could be a small moment of enlightenment. When you're sharing constructive criticism with someone and giving them feedback, even in a work environment, like if you're doing it in a way that's loving and compassionate, that could be a moment of enlightenment. It's not some fancy thing. It's just like, just being, just
It's live.
just
Nothing added.
being in harmony.
Yeah.
And being in harmony is basically what it's all about.
Right.
So to the second part of your question, like what's the difference with a drug induced enlightenment? I think I hear people talk about 5-MeO-DMT and the bufo experience, where they take that hit and they blast off so fast and so high where there's not even any notion of a self to even perceive or remember or reference what's happening. It's just they go into the white light of divinity. Or this, I've never taken it, but this is what I hear. That must feel, it sounds very enlightening. And I don't know if that's a state of mind that is possible by the sober human brain, or even one that we should shoot for. I think often, at least I fell into this trap early on in my psychedelic musings where I would go into these deep states of interconnection and feel this like raw authenticity and like really remember, what's important. And then I'll wake up on a Monday morning and say, all right, time to get ready for work, or I'm washing the dishes, doing the laundry. And I'm like, fuck, if only I could be on mushrooms doing this laundry, I would understand, like this would be so much more exciting and fun and interconnected. And I don't think that's the lesson of these psychedelic medicines. The lesson is like, at any moment, you could experience presence at a deep level by choosing to just be aware of what is present for you in that moment. And if there's opening for it, if there's a way for you to use your energy to extend some kindness, some compassion, some love to the people around you, that's that's enlightenment with a cherry on top. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. It reminds me of the quote from, I don't know who, but there is no enlightened person, only enlightened action.
Yes. I love that.
I really like that. Yeah. And well, there's so many that reminds me of. Enlightenment is nothing special. And yeah, I got caught up when I was much younger in the chase of enlightenment to eventually find it in the most simple things, like doing the dishes or doing the laundry.
Right. Yeah. The banality of many moments of human life are not like inbuilt pauses between moments where you can feel present.
Mm-hmm.
They are omnipresent invitations to be present. And one thing that's become more clear the longer I've been, walking my path is that enlightenment doesn't need to feel exciting or even positive, right? If you are going through something deep and sad, if you are willing to sit in the fullness of that emotional experience and feel it fully without resisting what is coming up for you, that's also enlightenment. Right? It doesn't need to be this cloudy, picturesque idea of like, breathing with the cosmos and nature. It could be, enlightenment could be fucking messy. It could be sad. It could be destructive.
Right.
It's all about just being authentic to your present moment experience.
Right. Totally.
What do you guys think of this? I watched a YouTube video a few months ago, and forgive me if this is like really, if you guys haven't seen this before, but it's talking about these Zen masters who attained enlightenment. There's like one or two very famous ones, and they would like kill people and have sex with all these people, and like they were enlightened. And I don't have, all of the details, but I just remember not fully understanding the rationale, because the video broke down like, oh, here's why these people were still enlightened. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Does that bring anything up when I share that?
Yeah, I think we shared that video, or you shared it with me, and I don't remember what they said either, but I do remember feeling confused by that as well.
So Jack, what do you remember from that video about how an enlightened man could be enlightened while killing people?
Honestly, I don't have a very good memory of it, so I'll have to do a rain check. But what I do remember is like something about these people are still in the flow. Like these people had somehow transcended their ego and were only following instinct. So I don't know. Maybe that's why it's an issue that's kind of like provocative and controversial. Like not everybody everyone might not agree that those people were enlightened.
I think different schools of Buddhism and generally different spiritual traditions might have different understandings of what it means to be enlightened. Whereas like in Theravada Buddhism, once you're enlightened, you are, you leave this world, you reach nirvana. And in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a much bigger emphasis on compassion and returning to the world as a bodhisattva and helping others also reach liberation. So there might be that coming into play.
Yeah, I remember a podcast I listened to with Jack Kornfield, and he was saying, Jack, to me, he's just this like loving, compassionate, like Dharma uncle. He's just like so gentle in his soul. And he was saying how he had like a contractor coming to work on his roof, and the roofer wasn't doing a great job, and he was taking a long time and fucking up the project. And Jack gave him a couple of passes to, see if he would do a better job. And then eventually when he didn't, Jack was like, look, sometimes you gotta just do what's there. And in that moment, I spoke the contractor talk, and I was like, listen here, you dumbass. Like, I hired you to do this fucking job. Like, get my roof done, And that, that may have been a moment of enlightenment for Jack. And maybe there's some connection here with that video you're referencing. Responding to the needs of the moment.
That's hilarious, and I totally get it.
Yeah, me too.
So I have another thing about psychedelics and meditation that I've been like thinking about a lot. When you meditate at first, you get into this very distractible mindset of having a lot of thoughts and a lot of sensations and feeling just the busyness. And one of the misconceptions people run into often early on is that that's somehow a mistake. You're somehow doing meditation wrong when you're feeling busy. Whereas the true conception is the mind is for thinking, right? And you're totally cool with having thoughts because you're a human, and that's what human brains do. So the real thing with meditation is not to like empty your mind completely, but to bring your awareness to what is flowing through your, the radar of your attention, and welcome it, right? Bring this this atmosphere within yourself of hospitality and acceptance, welcoming whatever comes through you. And if you've ever trained or been somehow prepared for a psychedelic ceremony before, you'll notice that what I just said is almost verbatim how we train people to go into psychedelic experiences. The idea of a successful psychedelic journey being narrowly confined to positive feelings and laughter, or needing to target this trauma in this way, you quickly notice gets dissolved immediately once you start feeling it, because it's never what you expect, and it's always what you need. So the invitation there is exactly the same. It's like, you don't need to constrict or define your experience under, the influence of mushrooms, but just welcome what's there, sit with it, and again, harmonize with that flow of wherever it's taken you. So yeah, hospitality is the word that I sit with in my own journeys now. I call it radical hospitality. I'm like, no matter if it's like a golden unicorn or like the scariest fucking demon I could possibly conjure in my imagination, I want to approach all of it the same way, which is rolling out the guest mat and saying, you are welcome. Come, let's explore this. Well, what are you doing here? Let's hang out. And the difference of rolling out the guest mat and shutting the door on what's there is often the difference between a bad trip and a meaningful trip, a therapeutic trip. So there's a story in Buddhism where Mara, there's this character in Buddhism called Mara. Mara is this like embodiment of all things evil and fear and jealousy and sadness, and he's like this scary motherfucker. And everywhere Mara goes, people run and go run into their house and lock the door. And one day Mara is walking in Buddha's village, and the Buddha is enlightened at this point, and everyone else has run away, but the Buddha comes outside and he's like, Mara, what's up, homie? Like, you wanna come in for some tea? Let's hang out. And so Mara comes and sits at the Buddhist table in this story, and they're sitting there drinking tea, and Buddha's serving tea, and he's like, so Mara, like, what's up? How's it been going? What's going on in your life? And Mara's like, oh, sometimes it's kind of hard being Mara. Everywhere I go, people are afraid of me. It's like there's always just this fear. And so Mara starts to open up, and it's exactly the same with your fears in everyday life. When you run and hide and dissociate and lock the door in all the clever ways that humans do through our addictions and dissociative tendencies, we're just fueling Mara's fear energy. But once you look at Mara and you say, hey, I see you, you're here, come on in, like you're welcome here, come have a seat. The nature of that fear, the nature of Mara, starts to open up and actually become not a scary thing, but this vulnerable, open thing that has something to teach. And that's where this hospitality thing has been coming through for me very strongly. So sometimes I'll see my clients in the ceremony with their eye mask on, and I'll hear them whisper like, Mara, come in for tea, or like, you are welcome. And these cool little affirmations that people use. So that's just a strong encouragement from my side, having sat with many fears, and more of them are still coming. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of Mara going on, especially these days. But all Mara wants is to be invited in for a cup of tea. That's what I'll encourage you to do.
I love that. All Mara wants to be invited for a cup of tea.
Yeah, the timing
where
on
attention goes. Oh, go ahead, Jack.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Nate, like the timing on that is perfect, because tomorrow I have a ceremony planned and I'm going into some Mara, let's say, and that's just a perfect reminder of like, welcome, like, let's talk, let's hang out. And it also brings up when I first started meditating, maybe I was like, I don't know, 17 or 18, and I told myself for months that I was becoming painfully self-aware. And that right there is the like closing the door. It's like this judgment that to be self-aware is inherently painful. And eventually I realized like, no, it's not painful to be self-aware. I'm just aware that there is pain here and I need to welcome it.
Yes, it is. It is a way of getting in touch with your pain, but also with your greatest joy. To meditate is basically to just say, hey, I'm a human, and how about I try just experiencing whatever comes with this human packaging right now. And that's going to include the full spectrum, 1 to 10, between love and hate and everything in there. And again, there's no reason to push away the 1s and 2s in that spectrum, because having 1 and 2 in part of your emotional field is what enables you to have 9 and 10 as well. And people who this is a pattern I've noticed from feedback I have gotten directly from clients who are on antidepressants and different kind of psychiatric medications. They have told me time and time again that they feel those drugs don't actually expand their capacity to feel the 8s, 9s, and 10s, but it shortens the window to feeling, let's say, 3 through 6. And because of that, you don't have to go through the 1s and 2s. And if you're living in the state of 1s and 2s, it's really nice to have a life raft where you can climb on and get into that 3 to 6 range. And that's why antidepressants can be so valuable. But the invitation of being human is to live between 1 and 10. And meditation and psychedelics is like just a very direct way of saying, let's experience all that this being has to offer.
Thank you. Everything you both said just makes me think of what you resist persists, right? Especially in psychedelic experiences. Are we thinking of wrapping this up, Jack?
You read my mind. Yeah. I have a
Okay.
couple of closing questions, unless you want to ask those, Lou.
No, well, I just wanted to say we'll have to have you back because I feel like there's still so much more to talk about, specifically psychedelics and integration. Sorry, meditation and integration, which I think is just like so, you know, goes together like peanut butter and chocolate.
Peanut butter and chocolate, even better than peanut butter and jelly.
Right.
Nice. So as we start to wrap up, Nate, I just want to say thank you very much. This has been a really wonderful conversation. If people want to find you, or not like find you and kill you, but just, find you and follow you.
Everyone's enlightened.
Yeah. How should they go about doing that?
If you're trying to find me and kill me, I live in a remote island off the coast of Antarctica. If you're trying to find me to hang out and share some good vibes and some experiences, you could go to my website, which is natemacanian.com. And I'm hosting ceremonies and retreats of all kinds all over the place. So also feel free to contact me through that site or email me at natemacanian@gmail.com. Would truly be happy to hear from you guys. And I have a little online course that I'm workshopping right now. I just created it. I'm like getting it off the ground. It's called the Compassion Alphabet. And it's 26 compassion-based activities and challenges and meditations and stuff like that. And they're all based off the letter of the alphabet. So you start at A and you go to Z. And it's clever and it's fun. And at least I think it's interactive. So if you want to be a student in this Compassion Alphabet, please send me an email and I'll add you to it. And I would love some feedback in return. But I think it came out pretty good. So happy to share that with you guys. Just email me, natemacanian@gmail.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to check that out too, Nate.
Okay.
That sounds like a great offering.
Me as well.
Cool. Lou, do you want to end with anything? Maybe a quote or any closing thoughts?
A quote. Oh, I definitely have a meditation psychedelics related quote, but can't think of any right now.
What about you, Nate? Anything to close
maybe
with?
Nate has something.
I have a quote that I've been loving recently, and it goes, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life is service. I acted and behold, service is joy." Yeah. For me, that's just a potent reminder that the 8s, 9s, and 10s of the emotional spectrum often come for me, and it seems like for most people, when I am giving and sharing with others. So if you are someone who is seeking to push more into that window of positivity, see what you can offer your community, the people around you.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Nate and Jack.